I'm very pleased to welcome Trish Morrissey to the sofa. She lives in deepest Somerset, so quite near. But of course, you're originally from Ireland. Tell us about your Dublin upbringing and when you first encountered photography there.
Yeah, so a fairly traditional Catholic upbringing, which was fairly strict in terms of meeting boys and all that sort of thing. My father was a tax inspector, so we were living in a sort of fairly well-to-do housing estate, but right next to a less well-to-do housing estate, if you know what I mean. And I first encountered photography when I worked at the Irish Independent. So I was very lucky to get a job there as a darkroom technician back in the sort of mid-1980s. And I hadn't really thought of photography as something that was a viable option for anything. I'd wanted to be an artist when I was in school. But to study art at university was very expensive, and my brother and sister were a doctor and an engineer, and my poor dad couldn't see the value of an art education, so refused to pay for it. So I just had the opportunity to work in the darkroom, as I said, in the newspaper, and photography then just sort of appeared as something that I became interested in.
And I assume you went to the gallery of photography up by Halfpenny Bridge.
Indeed, that's where it was. Yes, it's actually on the quays at that time, and that was the first time that I encountered Diane Arbus. In fact, I was only interested in Diane Arbus. It was none of the male photographers sort of that ilk and that period interested me. It was just her sort of approach to humanity, and it made me realise that, you know, from as I said, you know, my sort of fairly traditional Catholic upbringing, this was a very sort of opened my eyes to the potential of photography and meeting different types of people.
So if we look at your whole career, it's very much to do with the family album. And in fact, you started by doing 7 years with your sister. So what sort of inspired you to do that? And how did you plan it? And how did you actually create the images for that project?
Like most of what I do, it starts off from coming from various different angles that all just come together in sort of the right moment. So I'd been going through my parents' family album. It was just while I was studying for an MA actually, and I'd been going through my parents' photographs, which weren't in an album as such. They were in a big old wedding cake box, which everything was in an absolute jumble in it. There was like pictures of my grandparents' wedding, which would have been sort of Edwardian, right through to snapshots that I, made 5 minutes ago, with no particular order to them and no hierarchy. So I'd started putting order on them. I just put them into decades, knowing by the clothing I could tell what decade they were, and then asking my parents to sort of, what happened in these photographs. And it was through that I started to think about, and they would argue, this is it, they would argue about what was going on in the pictures and who was in them and when it was taken. So I started to sort of have this sense of photography not being about the fact, but actually being about the narration, the storytelling that goes with it. And I started to think that, when I was writing on the back of these photographs, what they decided was the consensus. I was, in fact, writing the history for the future of these photographs. So I started thinking about the slippery notion of reality in terms of pictures. And then I was also interested at the same time in the idea of the roles within families, that the way, sibling, within a sibling group, you always have like the sporty one, the funny one, the clever one, and how these roles are imposed from childhood. And then whenever you're back in that family grouping, you always revert to type, even if, you've like a successful doctor's career or something, outside of the family, but still you come back to being the silly, the clown or whatever. So I was interested in all those things. And then I started to think about the roles within our family group that, like I said, those sort of like roles. So I started to try and make photographs of ourselves, but playing ourselves as younger. So there's 5 of us. So it was a right old mess. And some of my siblings were not really into it and were super self-conscious, and those pictures just didn't work at all. But my older sister, who's 7 years older than I, which is where the title came from, was just fantastic. She would take direction. She could hold a pose. And I mean, she was quite self-conscious looking at the pictures afterwards and didn't like them and all of that, and felt, a real sense of sisterly duty to help me out, but didn't enjoy the process at all. So she was just brilliant. And so I ended up then just her and I playing all the parts.
And did you show these pictures to your parents, in fact? And what did they think of them?
Yeah, they what do they think of them? That's a very good question. I think they find what I do, or certainly did find what I do, and probably a little bit still now, very confusing. Because to them, a photographer was somebody that did a wedding or a communion, a Holy Communion or something, or maybe worked for a newspaper in the press. But to do the kind of photography and laterally filmmaking that I've been doing, I would say confusing is probably the best word for it, but kind of proud as well. My dad would never show it and never let on, but my mother tells me he was quite proud of me.
Because by this time you'd moved to London, in fact, so you'd left Ireland behind to do the BA and MA?
Well, actually, I'd left Ireland already 10 years at this point. I came to London, I can never remember exactly when, because the late 80s, early 90s is a bit of a haze. And I know I went to France for a bit and worked in the sort of seasonal work, and then I came to London for a bit and was back to Dublin for a bit. So I think it was probably about 1990 when I moved to London fully. And I worked as an assistant to various commercial photographers. And I had come to do the Westminster. I hadn't come to do it. While I was here, I decided I would apply for it and got a place. The Polytechnic of Central London, as it was at the time, which is now Westminster. But then I'd spent the summer assisting, and I just thought I'd carry on assisting. So then I did that, and then I worked myself as a commercial photographer for about 5 years, but it never really sat properly with me at all. I was quite a grumpy. I think I was quite a grumpy photographer.
In other words, you just wanted to do your own work.
Well, I was always doing my own work, even though during all this period. But what would frustrate me enormously was that you'd go along to an advertising agency, for a meeting to show your work, and you'd show them what I would call my work, and they would call my work my test shots, like I was testing something out. And I said, no, this is my work. And then so I kind of got spat out of commercial photography in a way after the MA. So I didn't do a BA, is what I was building up to say. I went straight into an MA at the end of the 90s. I think it was 90. I can't remember. I think I graduated in 2001, so I started in 99. But when I tried to get after that, get back into commercial photography, I was it kind of like, again, these meetings, and you'd arrive with your work, and the one guy just said, "Oh, I just never know what to do or say when people come along with work like this." And I thought, do you know what? I think I'm done. This is if you can't see what I can see, then I'm it's the wrong environment. And having done the MA, not having done a BA, I sort of absolutely utterly devoured the theory and the reading and the regurgitation of the work in the essays, because writing is another thing that I'm very interested in doing. I write scripts now and stuff. So,
but had you started to show your work in photographic galleries by that time?
Not really, no. I'd done a series of photographs of women with mustaches, which got a huge amount of press and was shown in a little gallery in Manchester. And actually at the Tomblau Gallery in London, now that I remember. This would have been around about 1999 or 2000. So not properly, no. I mean, 7 years was the first proper show, yeah.
Okay. And then there's Front, which is one of my favourite series, and that's where you took 12 images and you substituted yourself with the woman of the group, or was it strictly a woman, or was it a man as well, or did you just choose to replace the women in these groups on the beach?
Very much the woman, the mother figure. Yes, it was very much about replacing or impersonating or becoming the mother of a group. So there's all sorts of the dynamics of the matriarch, the dynamics of the sort of the woman to woman exchange as well. So and also because when I approached families with a camera as an artist wanting to make a project about families on beaches, it was often the male, the dominant male in the group, the alpha male, if you like, would respond to my questions, and then I would always try and redirect it to what I would, to the women within the group. And then there was a different sort of dynamic, and then the men tended to sort of come to the back of the camera to have a look and see what it will look like from the back, whereas the women had a very different response. I mean, it was an enormously generous arrangement from. I mean, I see them as collaborations, and they're all titled by the women that I've replaced, because they actually take the picture. The women have taken the picture, so they come out to the camera, and I show them how to, because I'm working on a 4x5 as well, negative film. So it's a very much a collaboration, and I'm still in touch with some of the families actually, even now. 50
and did it take
later.
quite some persuasion to?
No, not at all. It I knew when I started to do it. To approach families, I very quickly sort of got the psychology of who would say yes and who would say no. I had a few disasters to begin with, but once you've lost them, you've lost them. There's no persuading. It's either a yes or a no straight away. They either get what you do. I mean, I had samples of pictures that I had already taken with me to show them, and then of course I was using Polaroids as well, so they could see. And the exchange, part of the exchange was that I did a beautiful portrait of them on the beach, and they got a 10x12 portrait of the family intact,
right?
without the interloper.
Okay. And then after that, you started to get more into looking into archives, and again, you are always the person in the photograph. So this is, if you like, throughout your career, it's basically been a set of self-portraits in different guises. Not quite Cindy Sherman, but different projects show different ways of representing different ideas, and that's how you express your sort of work, if you like, by impersonating these different, usually women, occasionally men as well, later on. That's right.
Yeah. So I actually don't see much of what I do as self-portraits at all. I think there's three series that are certainly self-portraits, which is the failed realist and the successful realist, and then the more recent project that it's an ongoing one with my daughter, the Maiden and the Crone. So those series are certainly self-portraits. So they're very much collaborations with my daughter. She did the face painting for those. So they were done. The first series was 2011, and then 17, and that's also when I started doing the Maiden and the Crone series. So apart from those, I actually don't see them as self-portraits. I see them as performances. They certainly have parts of me in there, and they're always going to be semi-biographical because I'm in them, and I'm always sort of, from the characters that I create, I'm always looking for something that connects me to them. There's always something visceral when I start working with a character. It's almost, I can't put my finger on what it is, but there's a gut feeling and emotion that attracts me to this character or person. I mean, most of them are based on real people.
Yeah. The series of the face paintings done by your, I believe, 4-year-old daughter, 4 or 5?
Yeah, that's right.
Explain why it was you wanted to do this, and did you have to persuade your daughter to paint your face? Maybe she thought it was a bit much, or did she just leap at the opportunity?
Well, it was a period in our lives when we were spending a lot of time at home, because we had, her younger brother was born with severe health issues, which meant that we were at home a lot, and he was tube fed, so he was attached to a feeding machine for like 18 hours out of 24. So we could go out of the house, but we were at home a lot. So face painting was just one of those things that we did as an activity. And there's the classic sort of, you always paint the girls as flowers and fairies, and the boys are always tigers and dinosaurs. But so she just wanted to turn the paintbrush on me. It was her idea to paint me. I didn't have to persuade her at all. And in fact, it was quite a sort of an endurance test, because she was the whole point of the idea of the failed realist is that it's the developmental stage where children have more ideas than their motor skills can convey. So they can speak about things, and they draw things that we can't see what they see, but they can see what they're describing. So that's what that, if that makes sense, that's what we began working with. So she was, instead of doing all those sort of, classic motifs, she was creating these dreamscape, like she was coming up with ideas that were to do with her life experience, or a film she had watched, or a dream, or a character from something. So she was using my face as a canvas in a very, very, very different way, like not without the sort of the knowledge of what face painting is, if that makes sense.
So they all had a narrative at their heart.
Absolutely, and she titled them all. So they're all stories.
And then later on, you started this new collaboration with her when she was, I believe, 11, where you have a photograph of you with her. And again, was that something that she came up with, or was this an idea that you had?
No, this was an idea that I had. I wanted to, as an older mother, I mean, I was 38 when I had her, so we sort of hit menopause and puberty, adolescence at the same time. So there was a sort of a very important female moment, I think, which I wanted to try and capture, that idea of, that's why it's called The Maiden and the Crone. I mean, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek, self-effacing title, but the idea being that she's sort of growing into her womanhood and I'm sort of growing into my crone phase, my witchy power.
And then can you explain what Self-Portrait with Two Snails is all about?
Yeah, sure. So this was my response to the COVID-19 lockdown, I guess. It was actually a project. Del Barrett from 100 Heroines had asked me to come up with a picture for a project she was doing. And I thought I would photograph myself with some snails. Since lockdown was all about, for me anyway, growing food and battling the snails and making sure that my family was all fed and their sanity was intact. And, there was so much going on in that period of time. There was so much and nothing, if you know what I mean. I mean, days just dragged, weeks flew by, and then the horrendous news, millions dying. Oh, it was just horrendous. So
Homeschooling.
We gave that up pretty quick, I tell you. That did not go down well in our house. We decided that, it just made everyone cross all of the time. So we decided to ditch that, and it made no difference in the end whatsoever. Anyway, so I was watching these snails and having time to actually watch snails operate, and they're really clever, incredible things, the way they move, the way they sort of go round and over obstacles. So I kept some of them to study them in a sort of in a box, but I'd only put cling film over the top, and they escaped out the cling film. The next lot I had in a glass, I mean, lots of air holes and stuff and lots of vegetables in it, but I didn't really look after them terribly well, and their shells got a bit thin. I felt very guilty about that. So I put them into the hedge as a sort of back into the food chain. And then the next lot I really looked after really well, and there was little ones and big ones. So I thought that I would try putting them on my face and see what would happen in terms of, how they would navigate my face. And they represented the children. So I had a little and a big one. So the idea being that I was just sort of completely subservient to the dynamics of the family, and just because by trying to sort of to carry on as normal created too much friction and resistance. It was better to just be completely passive and just do the day-to-day, get up, do the breakfast, clear up, look after the children, make sure everyone's okay, and not even think about going into the studio, not even think about doing any work. Just, of course, the sun was shining. It was a very sunny, sunny weather, and trying to grow food was, I think a lot of people did that at the time as well, and battling the snails. So that's what that's about. It's a metaphor.
And then since then, I've noticed that you've done a lot of projects where you've looked at archives. You started in Hestakun, and then in fact you moved to an archive in Finland, where you explore the different people represented, and you often impersonate them. So, and I think at the same time you started doing films. So would you say you're into a different phase of your work with this combination of filming and the archive, if you like, representation?
Well, my work is constantly moving, so perhaps yes, you could say that it is a new phase. Although I made my first film in 2004, and was shown at Impressions alongside the 7 years work. So it's not a new thing in terms of my work, but I think I've upped the sort of the quality and the dynamics of how I make films now is quite different to how I did then, which was just an amateur camera.
And
single shot.
How long would the films be?
The first one is only a couple of minutes long. The Snails that you mentioned, the self-portrait with the 2 snails, is 3 minutes long. The longest film I think I've made is 12 minutes. Mm-hmm. So they do, yeah. So in terms of archives, I think, well, the family archive I worked with, 7 years was born from a family archive of photographs. So I think my interest in archives has always been there because I'm really nosy, and it sort of satisfies that sort of curiosity of nosiness. But actually, the first archive I worked with was the other way around. I worked in Finland with the archive initially, and then at Hesticum.
And how did you make that Finnish connection?
The Finnish connection, I was invited by a Finnish artist, Ville Lenkere, to take part in a residency at the museum, the Syrjäkylä Museum in Finland in 2014-15. So that was an amazing opportunity. This was the sort of the brief, if you like, for the residency was they invited 10 international artists to be in this little town north of Finland. It's not even north of Helsinki. Sorry, it's it's a 1-horse town which was built around a paper mill in the sort of mid 1800s. But the paper mill family were massive patrons of the art, so they started a big art collection. And left a huge endowment to create a museum. So one of the first projects they had was this residency. Roger Ballon was actually part of it as well. Alina Brotheris.
Did you all go together?
We were all there at the same time. Yeah,
So it must have been quite good fun then.
It was actually. It was absolutely fantastic. I mean, some people came. I was there for probably the longest. I was there for nearly 2 weeks. Some other people only came for a few days. What they really hoped I would do would come and make another front in the town. But first of all, I don't like to repeat myself. Mm-hmm. And second of all, I really didn't know how that was going to work, because the whole point of front was that it was actually also on the beach. So they had the sort of the symbol of the border between the land and the sea, order and chaos, all of that thing. I mean, there was so much symbolism in front. There was just absolutely no way of recreating it in a sort of Finnish town. So I kind of I almost tried to sort of worm my way out of it many times, because I just couldn't see, because I'm not the kind of artist or photographer mm-hmm. who could just turn up somewhere and make something out of nothing. I need to have a plan. I need costumes.
And you need motivation of what you want to say.
And motivation of what I want to say, yes, absolutely. So the curator, Ville, said, oh, did you know that there's an archive of photographs in the museum? I mean, they're not publicly available, but I'm sure I can get you access. And then it all just fell into place. This archive is over 30,000 photographs of the town, of the factory, of famous people within not famous, but, noted people within the town. It was just day-to-day life of the town. Because as it turned out, the local newspaper had donated all of their archive to the museum as well. So there was massive amount of material all online. So I spent about, several weeks just going through, say, 100,000 pictures. Not 100,000, sorry, 100 pictures a night. 100 pictures a night.
Swiping right.
Sorry?
Swiping right. Swiping
right, yes. You get so full, as you know, when you're looking at pictures. So I couldn't look at too many at a time, because then you'd skip. So I whittled them down to about 100 quite quickly, and then whittled it down further again. And then there was about 15 images that they just really stuck with me. There was like a sort of something that I recognised in each of these characters, something that just hit me. Again, it's gut feeling that I can't really
And these are the ones that you went to and recreated.
I recreated, yeah. So I did a lot of the. I have a stylist that I've worked with since 7 years. He's also a really good friend. So we sort of get together. We play with ideas. It's very playful to begin with. Working on costumes and then on motivation. I mean, it is like each photograph is like a little mini play, because they have to think about what the person's day is like, who they're married to, or do they have children, or do they have a pet? Have they got an elderly mother who needs looking after? What's going to happen before this, after this picture when they've left? What's happened to them yesterday? All of that has to be sort of somehow internalized, so that you can then. Otherwise, you're asking people to suspend their disbelief with my photography. You're kind of, I'm asking them to believe in me as a character. So all of these elements have to be there.
And do I assume this connection with the invitation to Finland led ultimately to the retrospective that you got in the museum there?
Yeah, so we've kept in touch over the years. And in fact, amazingly, the director of the museum came to the exhibition at Hesticum, which was actually probably one of the few benefits that I know of Brexit, because he was due to be in the UK to as an adjudicator for the European City of Culture, and I think they literally were told on the Thursday, and they were supposed to fly in on Saturday. Europeans don't come because we're not going to be in City of Culture anymore because we're not in Europe anymore. And he was like, "Oh, well, I'm going to go anyway." So I picked him up from the train station, and we chatted in the car, and he came and saw the show. And then on the way back to the train station, he said, "I want to do something. I don't know what, but I'm going to do something." And then a couple of weeks later, it was going to be, well, we could do a small thing really soon, or we could do a really big thing in a few years. And I said, "Well, I'll take the big thing in a few years, thanks."
Okay, well, great to talk to you, and I do hope that the show that you had in Finland moves to the UK so we can all see it here.
Well, there will be some. There is going to be 2 shows. There's one in Impressions in Bradford later on this year, and one in Dublin, but they will be much reduced. Yeah.
Thank you, Trish.
Thank you.